Welcome back to the Restoration Republic podcast, where it's my dad and I talking about corruption in LA and the different types of corruption. But today we're going to go into architects and what that looks like in the construction world.
Yeah. One of the keys to any project, obviously, is the beginning. Part of that beginning is the right architect or the right design. And what I would encourage owners to do as they're listening, looking at houses and saying, well, who designed that? Who designed that? That's not always the full story. So a great design is one thing, but getting that job to a buildable state is completely different. And part of that process is a great design, of course, that an owner loves and falls in love with, basically fitting on that property with the proper setbacks, incorporating sunlight and obviously which way it should face. But also, it's one of the questions that I always come up with as an owner's rep is like, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I just had this meeting, by the way, the other day in Pacific Palisades with a gentleman. And I said, does your architect, is he fully staffed? Is he fully in-house? And he's like, what does that mean? I go, well, what that means is, yeah, great design's awesome. But does he offer up any 3D renderings for visualization? Is there any modeling done? Who does his construction drawings? Does he have an interior design division? And a couple of his answers obviously were yes, it was a good sign, but some of the stuff he couldn't answer. And what happens is these architects, just like everybody else, will take on a lot of projects because they'll take it to a draftsman. There'll be a lead architect with his license number, and he'll have 10 different designers, right? Well, those designers aren't him. Now, he'll guide them and stuff, and that's fine. But there's sometimes, there's things that this draftsman will do, and it'll be a little different than this main big name designer, right? Once that happens, also there is they'll sub out or they'll ship out their drafting process to a third party. That's very typical. So an architect will do a design and he'll get the concept done. It'll be at 25% and he'll say, hey, it's time to get out to a draftsman. Some of these draftsmen are international. They're in India, China. They are out of state and they end up doing some of the drafting work. Is that bad necessarily? No. But it also, I think, creates a little disconnection from the original designer who's local, met with the owner, to a independent, third-party, international person trying to understand, what the intent is of the design. And sometimes it's a disconnect. And that's the start of what I consider a little fracture. Because I like companies, architectural companies that are all in-house. That means they have their own design, fully, all their draftsmen in-house. They can be right on, hands-on to make changes. I think it's a completer, better package. And then also, obviously, it's ideal to have an interior designer, right? That's usually someone else that steps in with an architect. But some of these architects now have their own designers. That's ideal for an owner, as long as they like that designer style, right? But having all those together under one house or a roof is so much easier for owner reps, for GCs, for getting answers right away, changes right away, getting modifications completed. It's such an easier deal. So I wanted to kind of put that out there that there is a little bit of a science even to picking the right architect to make sure it's a good fit for your job. Now, if you're just looking for money savings and you just want a plan set and you already kind of have your design and you don't need a high-end name, then go to a guy that is affordable, charges a certain amount per foot, but he'll probably end up shipping out third-party parts of that design process. And then usually plans always take longer than they tell the owner. They say, okay, we're gonna get this done at this time, and usually they drag on. But a lot because
how long do plans usually take?
Plans can take as quick as 90 days for a concept, up to 6 months to 8 months for a full set of drawings.
And why do you think it takes that long?
I think it takes that long. It depends on the job size, but it can be an owner making changes, right? They go through different iterations of design, right? There's an interior design that is kind of towards the latter, but there's an outside concept, right? Then you have to go through all the different elevations, northwest, south, east, and go through those elevations, So it just takes some time to put all that together and say, hey, Mr. Owner, do you like our concept? Do you like how the house is sitting? Now we're going to go into, once they sign off on the design, then we'll get into the interiors. What do those interiors look like? Because they'll see it on a plan view and go, gosh, that room looks good. I can fit my furniture there. But now they go into what's called elevations. And you get to show the client, hey, this is what this wall is going to look like with your cabinetry. This is what this wall is going to look like with your kitchen.
Right.
And they can visualize because they're standing in the room, they see the elevations, but that takes some time. So
for architects, I think that we have to establish what is their main goal. And the main goal for many architects may be just to have a happy customer. But deep down, I think every architect strives to design this crazy, like, whoa, because architects want to be known in the area. So they want to build something that'll make them known, right? There's a lot of famous architects that really are just creative and have a certain style that people love, and then it'll just catch fire and everyone wants that guy. So a lot of these architects, I think, one of their biggest motivations is they want to build something that they're proud of, but they can also yeah, I built that. But a lot of the times they'll make something so crazy, it takes so much money to build something like that. You would have to have such deep pockets. It's almost, sometimes it's like just structurally, like, how do you think that would work? Like, why, like, that wouldn't work. You know what I mean? Because there's certain codes, and I don't think a lot of architects realize that.
yeah, I think they try to, but I think sometimes they over design, like over their skis, and not thinking about budget or prices of cantilevers and retaining walls and infinity pools that are over retaining walls that are off of a setback. So and incorporating tons of caissons when maybe you used to go to a matte slab instead of a caisson. So I don't know if they think through all that. That's again why kind of promoting owner reps can say, hey, can we be a part and help you, owner and architect, help you think about other options that might be applicable when you go to build this or when you go to price it up. Because, it all comes down to, at the end of the day, experience. And a lot of lessons I learned only is because, trial by fire.
Right.
Like uncomfortable situations like, yep, that one's there. I'm not going to do that again. So, I think that I can't stress enough to have the proper architect on board and then someone to make sure that a full set is fully done and not to rush that process. And then once that's done and someone's really checked the box and said, hey, this is a good buildable set with all the construction drawings, then you take it to GCs and say, give me numbers. Otherwise, these guys are just throwing numbers together because it's incomplete and they don't know what they don't know. So they're going to go, you know what? They didn't give me any landscape drawings on this. It's just the shell, but they want a landscape budget of 150 grand. Well, then they have to design backwards to $150,000 and you're not getting anything with quality for $150,000.
After 33 years, 33 years?
Yeah.
33 years of experience and work in this industry, what would be like, you must have run into a ton of architects. So what would be like an example? You don't have to name them, obviously, but like, give me an architect that was probably the worst architect you've dealt with and why they were the worst architect you've dealt with. Do you have one? There must be some that come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say
Chicago, Florida, or Cali.
Yeah, I'd say I do think of one, and it was kind of along the lines of what I was talking about. We create a beautiful design for a building. And then when I would question, hey, through an RFI and say, hey, I need more information.
What's an RFI?
Request for information.
Okay.
For, clarifications on a drawing saying, hey, we need help us here because we don't have enough information to build this and really identify a drawing sheet. And you'll highlight it and say, hey, we'll need this because the subcontractor's asking, that this is a structural wall. How are we adding, a recessed TV system inside of a structural wall with a shear panel.
Right.
And when you do that, this one architect that you're making me think of would go just ape. He would put an email out like, how dare you question me, blah, blah, blah. So I could never copy the owner. I'd have to just go to him direct. And he was very offended anytime I said, hey, this doesn't work in this location. So he's difficult to work with, almost like a prima donna,
Yeah.
right? So they're these artists that have beautiful designs, but they just want you to figure it out. Just get it
Yeah.
done. Just stop bothering me. And there's a couple I think of. One was in Laguna Beach, and when I started questioning the actual design to get it built in the field through the rough framing stage, he got very defensive and became like kind of an antagonist on the job site.
Yeah.
And then, so culture is so important on a job site. Like, I know I'm kind of jumping topics here, but culture is critical to a job site, like anything else, like a football team or whatever. A great, good atmosphere with professionals and the right energy is so important. And that's kind of what we try to create, right?
Right.
Try to do maybe occasional barbecue, maybe take guys out, maybe do lunches, maybe donuts, maybe coffee sometimes, getting personal with these guys, but making sure that it's a team mentality. We're not there to do gotcha moments. I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to catch them prior to gotcha moments to say, hey, let's think about this before we do this. And like, yeah, I guess we could do that. And really checking the boxes prior to putting things in the ground. We don't want bad energy on the job site. We don't like it coming into a hornet's nest. But you'll get some of that from either a bad set of plans and a GC that is not ethical. And those combinations are pretty toxic, you know, so.
How many architects in your 33 years have you worked with? If you could give I know you're not going to get the exact number, but like over 1,000, over 100?
No, not 1,000. Probably about over 200, maybe different architects, maybe.
And of 200, how many did you truly like think, now that's a good architect?
I would say probably kind of back to what I was telling you before as a percentage, probably 20%. Like there's some good ones. There was some great in Chicago. There was a big firm out there that I was a big fan of Gensler. I thought, but I know it depends on where they're at in the country.
Yeah.
But Gensler, on a big project I did, put the right people in place, and they were phenomenal. Professional, responsive, thoughtful. They collaborated. They worked with you, gave you options. Phenomenal. That's why the experience can be amazing. Believe it or not, construction can be fun. Everyone's like, oh, but it can be fun. I know it's a big stressor. It's like like one of the things that causes divorces. It can be ugly, but if you put a good team together, like anything else, it's successful. Like I look at Joe Rogan, and it's not just Joe Rogan. He's got great people he's talking to. Right. The setup's great. Right. He's laughing. There's great energy. So I want the Joe Rogan experience in construction. I want guys knowing that they're going to be, listened to. They're going to be honored and respected, but they also have to do quality work, show up, do what they say, and they can't be abusive. And that includes the architects, by the way. Some architects are just they don't have a chip on their shoulder, but they're prima donnas, and they're very condescending individuals, and that's hard to work with.
Most architects have never been in the field, right? Or have they?
I would say
that you've encountered, because
when you say in the field, you mean swinging a hammer?
Yeah, like being in a trade, like understanding how it's built. You know what I mean?
I don't know that. I would say probably very few, probably under 10%, have actually worked in the trades, like in the field, and navigated their way up to being an architect. I know there are some, and those are the best, by the way. When they understand what it takes to, dig a trench 100 yards and it's in the rocky soil of like La Crescenta. Those are valuable, but I think most of them they went down, they got their degree, worked in another firm, architectural firm, and stayed inside an office. They went to the field a lot, but they've never grinded. They didn't do 2 years of electrical work in Chicago like you did, right? They didn't do, I worked 1 year as a logger in Montana. That was terrible. It sounded so cool. It was the roughest thing. My point is that there's little things that you get to experience, and architects, I think, generally are more office, collegiate, educated type of individuals, not field guys that came from the trenches.
What was the biggest? This is an interesting question. What was the biggest mistake an architect has made, but you had to do anyway? So, for example, digging a 100-yard trench in a very rocky terrain. Kind of stuff like that. Can you remember one where it
Well,
was like, why they didn't even think about this and you had to do it anyway?
I'd have to think about that. I might have to do a pass on that. There's like hundreds of those things. They
Really?
say, "Hey, just do this," and you go to the field and go, "Well, that's not going to work. That's not even close to going to work. Why would they design it that way?"
Right.
Um, I've seen one where they needed some lights for these large pots between two structures. So there's a patio. So a patio. And they forgot to do lighting for future pots to be lit at night. And so what they did is they buried low voltage under the pavers in the mud set instead of coming up coring through the ground or putting it in the slab with a proper like grommet or a pre-sleeve or some kind of a conduit. And they laid the low voltage in the mud set of the limestone tiles. What does that mean? Well, it means you can never move that stuff unless you're ripping up an entire
Patio.
patio that cost $100,000 in limestone that was shipped from France. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So I see that stuff all the time. And sometimes it's like common sense. It's like some of the best GCs are guys that just been around and just common sense.
Yeah.
Right. So, but guys sometimes get in a rush and they want to get it done. They want the owner to be happy. And they're like,
Right.
well, as long as they don't see how it's done, they're not going to see how the sausage is made, but I'm just going to feed it to them later.
Right.
And they don't get it. Right. So there is a proper way to do things, even when no one's looking. That's kind of the biggest thing that we do. When no one's looking, do you do the right thing?
Right.